Thank you all for coming back for the second part. So it's a Q&A session. I think a lot of you have been in the Q&A before. What's going to happen is just chatting away, but if you've got questions, put your hand up and we will come to you. And yeah, everything's being recorded as well, so just be aware of that fact. All good? Brilliant. Okay. Well, welcome, Emily.
Thank you.
Tell me about what you do and why we should be product-minded.
Oh, yeah, true. Yeah, why should we be product-minded at all? Well, I'm a technical product manager at Signable. For the record, I did actually used to work as a full-stack software engineer, and I made the transition a couple of years ago into product. I'm waiting for like the boo hiss. Like
What's it for the pay?
Well, to be fair, I think that I had a previous life in consulting and marketing, and I particularly in my previous role I started to work really closely with product managers, and I really realized, like, wow, this is something that I find really exciting. Obviously there's something very special about seeing your code out in the wild and making it work, but I also realized that the kind of product world is a really good cross section of being technical and then also like commercially minded and very commercially minded, basically. So yeah, I'm a technical product manager at Signable. Why should we be product minded?
I mean, what does technical product manager mean for
What does it mean?
us mere geeks who just code?
I think that there are lots of different hats that you wear in a small company. So I work for we're about 50 people, which is really cool. You wear lots of different hats. I initially joined the platform team, so my remit there was to manage, in brackets, the product, which was the large part of the scope, was actually migrating from our B2B app from V1 to V2. And basically within the first year, myself and the engineering lead on that team came up with a roadmap, effectively there's probably a better name for it, but like a tech debt roadmap, which was a couple of quarters ahead of our customer roadmap. So we could basically show to the business, like, okay, it's going to take time to invest in this migration, but if we want to have safer deployments and faster delivery rates on our customer facing features, we need to do X, Y, Z. So that was one of the main tasks that I did as a technical product manager. Obviously working closely with DevOps as well to understand how we can optimize the tools there for our one segment of our customers, which were our in-house developers. And then on the other side, also managing integrations and software systems that our employees were using. So helping them, helping improve data integrity in our CRM systems. We also had a kind of homegrown data management system, so basically improving that. And then after a year, I basically got the opportunity to move into the commercial or kind of customer facing side. So I now manage two customer facing teams, and that's also very exciting as well.
So you started off in the software world, then you became software product manager.
Yes.
And now
it's all software.
It's all software, but now you're commercial.
Yes.
More commercially.
So basically all the work we ship in these two teams will be used by customers, whereas, the customer traditionally, as in whoever's paying our subscription fees, whereas previously the customer were our engineers and our employees.
When you were making their life better for them by reducing the technical debt. Okay.
Exactly.
And so do you need a software background to do this, or could you come in as a product?
Great question. Great question. Great question. I don't want to be a gatekeeper, but I think it's been really helpful to have that background.
The software background.
Yeah, the software background, to come in and basically understand when people are talking about, in a really high level sense, like what kind of infrastructure changes we need to make to make sure that we don't have an outage caused by blah. I think it's been really helpful to have that background, but it's not necessarily crucial. I think, it depends what the business needs, but I think consider it, if you work in a very small and very quick environment, then I think it's really helpful to have that background. And I think increasingly looking at product management podcasts and looking at stuff, I don't know if anyone reads like Lead Dev or anything like that, but there's a lot of talk about the crossover between product and engineering. So it's not necessarily expecting people to do two jobs. It's more like, I think maybe in the past it was fine to have a very sales driven product management team, but whereas now I see a lot of people talking about you need to know how to use SQL, you need to have maybe some coding background to understand how stuff is built. So yeah.
And how different is the discipline from software engineering to kind of product thinking? Because the title of the Q&A is why we should be more product minded, I suppose.
Yes.
So what is product minded that we wouldn't be doing if we were software?
It's a really great question. And I think I also want to say, like, if you are open to it, I want to say, like, you can, in any role, it doesn't have to be software engineering, you can also be product led. Effectively, you're accepting that whatever product you're building or contributing to is going to be the key growth driver for your company. So as opposed to working for a company where there's a big emphasis on sales, or there's a big emphasis on marketing, like, oh, we've got the best brand and that's going to be leading the way for our kind of commercial growth. The product is the most attractive thing. So the user experience, how your product solves a particular pain point for your customers is going to be the main driver. And I think that the light bulb moment for me when I was working as a full stack engineer was seeing customers actually using the product and seeing how much it improved their lives, and seeing the data around that. So I understand, like, not everybody is going to be open to that and be thinking, oh, product just sounds like a load of metrics and numbers. But I think particularly if it depends on your organization as well, but if you want to kind of progress and be seen as like a particularly good asset, so obviously everyone here is super talented and really good at software engineering, but if you want to kind of progress and be seen as a close ally to product or design, I think it's good to kind of bear that product-led mindset, which we can talk about if you'd like.
Oh yes, yeah. So what would be like a product mindset
I think
then? That's kind of maybe different from software, say. Or is there no difference really?
I think you can fuse elements of product-led growth quite easily in software engineering. So, for example, if you are up for it, you can always, I think, for example, first and foremost, considering your customer. So I would never force anyone to be on a customer call with me, but I speak to our customers quite regularly. I'll email them, or basically we'll have campaigns where we'll sort of ask our customers to get in touch with us. And we get a lot of people booking calls with us and wanting to talk about how they use Signable and how it's helping them. And I think having engineers on those calls really brings to life, like, the why behind a piece of work. It's all well and good having a PRD document or really great user stories or lots of as much color and emotion and data put into it, but I think really speaking to the customers makes you realize, like, actually this is why we are building this, or validates the logic behind why we've selected X use case for an integration, for example. So that's one of the things.
And do you sometimes see things where actually, when you see the customers using them or possibly struggling with them, you go, oh, we can change that? Would that be under your remit when you're wearing your product hat?
I think the really cool thing is, what I wanted to say, or the message that I'm hoping to convey, is that if you want to lean into being a bit more product-led as an engineer, you ultimately have a big safety net, in the sense that the buck does stop with product. So if it's wrong, it's our fault in most cases. So I think that you can feel safe in making a suggestion, as long as it's backed by data, or for example, you'll also have probably like a lot more of a kind of, you're using the product every single day, probably testing it as well. So you'll be able to make logical decisions based on that. That's what I'm basically saying. Like, there's kind of like no loss in that sense. But I think the key thing to consider is, like, will the customer benefit from it? But then also, as a business, can we afford to build this? And I don't mean necessarily in terms of like cash. It's like, do we have the internal resources? Do we have knowledge to build this?
So you're kind of working almost at a much higher level of abstraction.
Yeah.
You've got, if the code's there and the customer's there, you're kind of moving away from the code towards the customer.
Yeah.
With that kind of thing. And so your first bit of this story, you became like a technical product owner, product manager.
Yeah.
And that was responsible for fixing the technical debt. I mean, how did you sell that to a company? Because I imagine that other people here who work with things, I'm just going to guess, with a bit of technical debt. Was that hard sell, or did that come from above?
Okay, so how do I package this? Basically, I was part of quite a few very interesting deployments, and I think the point for me, knowing that, like, from being on the other side as an engineer and having experienced a very organized way of dealing with deployments, I realized like we can do this better. And speaking with the, obviously having empathy with the lead. There's only so much you can do when you've got a lot of tech debt. But I think a big pull for me was to say we need to use feature flags. This is going to be one of the ways we can make deployments much easier. And instead of having these big bang deployments and potentially having hours and days of disruption, we can use this to kind of incrementally do these deployments. And then that triggered the whole conversation of, right, okay, well then why don't we treat our tech debt like a roadmap and say, okay, if we know we've got XYZ feature being released in the next quarter, then why don't we address this section of the tech debt in X part of the app or the API, for example? Yeah.
And did you just kind of migrate into that role, or did they say, oh, now you're going to wear this hat and do that?
That's a really great question. Basically, it was just from a lot of conversations with the lead engineer. I think a lot of it of being in product is about having being able to communicate and also build, I guess, trust with different stakeholders. And I think for me, what I just kind of took for granted of having been worked as an engineer is like, oh, people obviously see the value in this. But then it can also be really scary for people who are in product who don't have an engineering background to say, hey, I actually don't understand what this is. But as soon as you get it onto, I don't know, Figma, Miro board, whatever, if you can visualize it and say, this is going to give, if we have this tech debt all mapped out, it's going to give us the opportunity to release X feature, which has, I don't know, X amount of value attached to it. It makes it a lot more digestible and easy for people to be like, okay, right, I can understand what you're trying to do, instead of this kind of basement type, right, jargon filled, oh, this is going to take months to do. It just basically becomes a lot more easy to digest.
So did you have to kind of change your language when you're talking to people? Like developers might want it in one way, and how would you talk to business people then differently? How would you frame it so that they could take on board these things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I'm really lucky in the sense that where I work, there's quite a high level of technical understanding. I think that one of the things that I underestimated about going to product is the amount of delivery responsibility that you have. You can't just say, oh yeah, we'll have it out next quarter, and then it's just really bad if it's not there effectively, if you don't have a good kind of excuse. But I think that my recommendation is, if you're an engineer, try and be upfront about the trade-offs that you make. If you say, okay, if we build it X way and we don't tackle, I don't know, X issues that are existing in the code, or we don't do this upgrade, or we prioritize X, Y, Z, try and be as upfront as you can in terms of like how complex it will be to solve. Don't necessarily, I mean, it depends if you do sizing or anything like that, but I think try and be upfront about what the trade-offs are going to be, because I think that's another thing that I learned from going from engineering to product is like, you want to do the best quality piece of work that you can, the best quality code or solution, but sometimes that's not needed. You obviously need to get stuff done quickly, but not badly.
So you were responsible then for saying, we've got to get feature X out by February.
Yeah.
And then is there management involved with that? So when you talking to the development team, say, is this going to happen? And when they like, oh, I don't know, it's going to happen, you decide what you're going to do, so you still have that Feb deadline, or is that part of it as well, or change the scope of it? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I think that at least in my role right now, there's a lot of conviction behind how we make a product decision. So it wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, it's going to take a long time, we won't do it. It's more like, what is the minimum piece of value that we can release? And I think in tech debt, that's really, really hard to measure. But things like, I don't know if anyone uses Datadog or anything similar, you can have these reporting tools around like latency or uptime or hygiene scores. And if you can sort of bring that into a business narrative, that can be really helpful as well. For example, we'll use competitor uptime to measure against what we're up against as well. So that's really important.
And then, so I suppose latency, said if we reduce the latency by, I don't know, 20%, then we'll get more clicks or more, something like that. And it's part of your job when you're wearing the product hat to say, I think if we do this, we will get this uptick in conversion, or whatever it is. I suppose for Signable, it's what people signing up to Signable to use it.
I used to think that actually, in terms of like the technical solution, that's very much an engineering thing. Now that my role is very much more kind of focusing on work that's going to deliver the customer value, it's more like, can we do it as a business, and is it what our customers want? Is that what they're demanding? Looking at the data, looking at, you know, understanding who I've spoken to. Yeah.
So how do you decide what customers really want? Because in my experience, people say, "Oh, we want this," and then you deliver that, and it's not really what they want. Are there some tips for making sure you give them what they actually want rather than what they ask for?
Yeah, speak to them.
Speak to them.
Yeah, literally. I know it can be a bit scary, but so far I've only had really good experiences. We seem to get a lot of people wanting to talk to us who are like really, really love Signable, which is great. The people that are kind of a little bit, I don't know, having issues tend to go to support, but it is also part of my job to read. Actually, when I'm looking at a feature, we obviously have everything tagged. So I'll basically look through hundreds of tickets, look through all the feature requests, go on to FIDA, also have a look on, if possible, on social media, if anyone's written anything there. So look at all the written feedback, but then also try and get as much face time. I've actually not, obviously not met up with a customer, but as in like speak to customers as much as you can, and involve engineering and design if they want to. And if they don't want to, or if they don't have capacity, always record it and play it in, I don't know, if you do like end of sprint reviews, or you can share kind of like 2 or 3 minute clips with your team to kind of like bring to life what you're trying to build. So yeah.
I mean, you talk to customers, and I bet loads of them have got good ideas of things that you want to do. But I can imagine there could be hundreds of ideas, and then you've only got so much development resource. So how would you go around, picking which of these 100 ideas we should start with? Is there any analysis on which will drive more sales, or increase the customer value, or whatever?
That's a really good question. So you've obviously, depending on the squad, so you'll have like lots of different types of metrics, and the idea is you're obviously trying to boost all of them. So for example, one of them might be time to value. So how quickly is a customer experiencing value in your product as a new customer or a returning customer? And that could be lots of different ways that you measure this depending on what your product is. Another one is NPS scores. So how happy are your customers? Usability, how usable do your customers think your product is? But ultimately, it's a really great question. You also have to understand how quickly do you need this feature. But then I think, decision making is really hard. I think it's a science in itself. For me, when I'm making a scope, I look at the most mentioned problems that our customers have, and then basically do a recommendation, work with design, work with engineering, and we kind of come up with a scope based on that. Yeah. So I think that's probably something I wanted to say is like, if you can I think it can also be very product led for product to do this, but work collaboratively with engineering, product and design at a really early stage, because there's no use me being like spending like a month coming up with a scope for a project and then handing it over being like, right, this is what we're going to do. It's really, really useful to have your designer and also your engineer quite close when you're making those decisions.
Because they might sell, that's going to take years to do.
Yeah. Right, or something that I think might be really simple is actually very complex. Yeah.
Okay. And so what kind of when we're developers or IDE or we're Vim or whatever, what tools are you using now when you're doing your role? What kind of things to help you?
Great question. I think looking at a lot of data. Basically it's a lot less, I guess, I'm not necessarily looking, or at least in my role right now, I'm not necessarily looking at like uptime as much as I would have been a year ago. But things like we have SQL-based data management tools, so looking at our kind of what's happening in our database, so basically getting that reflected directly back to us. So how many new customers have we got? How many envelopes are they sending? That sort of thing.
So not the performance, as in how the database is doing, but more how many new customers are getting on, what's our customer churn, those kind of things. What's our lifetime value of the customers? Okay.
Slack is a big one too.
Slack?
Yeah.
As in
like basically. So we pipe a lot of our user feedback from these various channels into Slack. So I can just be like, okay, like looking at NPS scores, just look in one channel.
Also, what's an NPS score?
Oh, sorry, it's NPS. I've actually forgotten what it's called. It's basically looking at how happy your customers are with your product. So, for example, they can say on a scale of like 1 to 10, 10 being amazing, 1 being terrible, they'll give you a rating. And we've also given the option to give us feedback. So
how happy are your customers?
Quite happy.
Yeah.
We're okay.
And so also, is your day, I assume you'll spend a lot more time talking to people than maybe you were in developer days. Is that what other kind of changes are there in like the day-to-day jobs?
I actually welcome that, to be fair. I would say I'm quite a people person. However, that being said, in terms of context switching, that is definitely something that I've had to kind of learn to do or learn to manage. I think that similar to being an engineer anyway, you need to block time and say, you can't just say, oh, I've got 4 hours, I'm going to take my time with this. You have to kind of be quite disciplined. But yeah, I think being in a few more meetings, but not that many more, because obviously you have to understand the context of what other departments are doing, and feed what is relevant back into your team. Yeah.
Okay, so there's lots of communication, lots of, I suppose, chatting more frontline customers, getting the feedback and things like that. And would you ever go back to software, or do you love this now? I mean, if people are like getting bored of software, would you say this is something to think about? And if they were going to, what attributes would they need? I suppose being good at chatting to people would be one of them, or getting stuff out of people anyway.
I think that they can be two completely different career paths, but if you have like kind of quite a creative and entrepreneurial mindset, I think it's a really good and very rewarding role to go into. But I think that I don't know, let's see what the impact of AI is on all of our roles. But I think that from my side, no regrets. I just think that it's probably one of the most ambiguous roles in tech, which can be really difficult for some people. I think one of the advantages of being a software engineer is that it is very binary. Like, is the code right? Is it working? Is it broken or not? Whereas in product, it is very, it can be ambiguous. So, yeah.
It's interesting the point you make about AI. I think we're quite a long way off being replaced at the moment. But if you've got this is the code and this is the customer, we are moving in that direction. So who knows, maybe in 10 years' time, software developers will be a lot fewer, or they might not exist.
Maybe product as well,
Really? Product goes well to it?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I suppose you could put all this stuff into AI and it'll tell you what the customer really wants.
Yeah.
Have there been any attempts at that? Or I'm not trying to get rid of your job.
I don't know. I mean, I thought it was... So I was at a conference I was chatting to you earlier about it, called We Are Developers in Berlin. Has anyone heard of it? Yeah. It was fantastic. Lots of different tracks. So I went to unsurprisingly went to quite a lot, which were product and kind of business, entrepreneurialism minded. But there were an incredible amount of talks on AI and a lot of very, very passionate people talking about how to progress this. And I was just like, okay, I don't know. I think there's...
So AI could replace product people for engineers. So one day it might be AI telling software people what to do.
I think there will be...
It's a race. Who's going to get there? Who's going to lose their jobs first? Yeah.
I mean, I think it will be very much like if you are if you're a junior, I think it's going to be really hard to break into tech because, for example, right now as an AI user, you could quite easily be like, right, I'm just going to prototype this, I don't know, feature, show it to customers. If they like it, then we kind of hand it over to engineering and they kind of have to build it from scratch.
Oh, so you're doing that right now, actually?
No, I'm not doing it. I'm not, but it can be done. Yeah.
Has anyone got any product-related question? Oh, yeah, one over there.
I did, sorry, it's a bit I've been caching it in my mind. So you've got all of these customer requests that come in, and there's probably a lot, as you mentioned, there's a lot to go through. There's going to be a certain amount of features that customers are complaining about, as you said. At what point do you decide, well, you've got value here, this is, these people have been complaining this much, you get one point, we've added value on this side of the product. How do you then how do you make the decision to then spread value equally across your range of products and strategically?
That's a really good question. I think that where I work, we have an app we have an API, and I think that it really depends on the strategy. I think that when you look at both, for example, looking at your squads, look at velocity, try and break it down so that you're not kind of becoming a feature factory, that you're actually saying, okay, we're going to commit X amount of resources to our most valuable feature, which could be, I don't know, an integration, or it could be a UX redesign. And then if you look at your other product, you could kind of say, okay, we might not have the resources to do it now, but based on the amount of feedback we're getting, not necessarily complaints, it could be feedback, people saying, oh, we love your product, but it would be great if you could do X. Really weigh up if what they're asking for will be something that your company can actually deliver. So do you have the in-house knowledge? Do you have the, for example, from a marketing perspective, do you already have the kind of connections there that could potentially come up with an amazing campaign? So yeah, I mean, I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think sort of. So say you've been focusing on one area for a long time, say, I'm not sure what the product exactly does, but this feature that has, some features in it. And you've got other products that also add value to your business with you charging X amount extra for it. Where do you decide your neglect?
Okay. So I think if you have a whole suite of products, you already know which one is the cash cow, so to speak. It's obviously not smart to just plow all of your resources constantly into that one. I think this is where discovery comes in. So a big part of product is actually research. So obviously understanding what your customers want, what is the market doing, what are the trends. So trying to be a step ahead of that and understand, okay, well, we've got our cash cow, but maybe in 5 to 10 years' time, the market won't need this anymore. We should maybe start investing in our integration suite or in our API, for example, which has maybe been overlooked or deprioritized. So I think that, to your question, if you keep doing discovery and making sure that you're on top of, like, I don't know, compliance, or for example, in the EU, there's maybe new regulation about accessibility, like that will always form part of the decision making. And I think the context, this sounds like just words basically, but effectively when you're speaking to your also taking external stakeholders into accounts, for example, maybe the founder, maybe like there's a board of investors, you also need to take into account their perspectives as well. Not necessarily say yes to them, but kind of take that into consideration too. Yeah. Yeah. You can't basically like be fantastic at everything, but you can basically prioritize like what's the most important thing constantly. Yeah. Nice.
So that's interesting because I think it's really tough to know. Like if they're small tasks, you can almost do them, and it doesn't matter if it works. Well, obviously you want them to work, but if it doesn't work, you've maybe lost a week of development time or whatever. Yeah. And one of our clients, they want to invest something which is probably like 6 months of work across the whole team.
Yeah.
And it's in an industry where there isn't really any. They're kind of pretty much first to market. So you can't even look at your competitors and go, well, it's worked for them, so it's going to work for us. Because I assume that's what you would, oh no?
No.
But how then do we, if there is no real, if they are kind of first to market and they're trying something new, how do you know if you're going to, like 6 months is quite a chunk for a startup? Like what can we do to de-risk that decision? Or they go for it or not go for it? Is that the remit of a product person? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without knowing what it is you're trying to build, I can only give like vague advice, but I think it is a gamble in terms of deciding what you're going to build. But I think what you can do is, again, like I said, do market research, do some discovery. What you can also try and do is be really iterable. So if you can try and release a really small experiment, either be a prototype or get, say, arbitrary numbers, but like 50 to 100 customers or people testing out that idea, or even sort of speaking to these people and saying, is this something of interest to you, or do you think this would work? But preferably having some kind of prototype that they can try out and then be like, oh, actually, no, this is not useful for me. That would be my recommendation. If you can do like even like just something in 5 days, that will basically give you a really good idea of like if it's going to work or not. Or if you've got like adjacent features, so you might not necessarily have like I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example for you. For example, right now I'm using the data of an adjacent feature of something that we're going to launch. So it's not the same, but it's very similar. And I'm using that to map the adoption and therefore also the cost that's basically we're going to incur as a business for this new feature. So it's not necessarily going to be one-to-one, but it's giving us a really good idea of like when we're approaching vendors, we have some data to say, oh, if we're going to use X thousand amount of your service within 1 quarter, how much is it going to be? So yeah.
Okay, yeah.
You've got more confidence rather than just being like, I have no idea. And I think the danger of it's okay to look at competitors, but a lot of customers use your competitors for other reasons. It won't all necessarily be price related. It could also be for other services they offer. They could also be just about to sunset whatever you're about to start building, for example. So yeah, it's not always good to be too looking at the competitors. Yeah.
So an important thing when you're doing the looking at an adjacent feature is you need really good stats, presumably, about whatever the initial feature is. So to assess it, so what kind of information could we capture that will then help us decide?
Yeah, that's really, that's a really good question. With engineering, you also have the opportunity to install product analytics in your code. Doesn't necessarily have to be something that you pay loads of money for, because obviously you've got the likes of Pendo, etc. If you want to, go for it. But I know that there's a lot that you can already like store from, for example, front end interactions. But then also when you're looking at the database, work with product and engineering to sort of decide, okay, if we're going to, if a user is going to do X thing, I don't know, for example, send an envelope. Do we want to store it? Do we want to have X amount of this data piped to another graph so that we can look at this quickly? I think the example that I was talking about, I very much look at, in our case, how many envelopes have been sent with like a verification option, something very simple like that.
Because for those who don't know, Signable
is an e-signature platform.
Platform. So envelopes is a virtual thing you've sent to say, I've
basically an envelope with documents, whatever you want to send it to people, and then
But have there ever been things, maybe not where you are now, but in previous businesses, where suddenly somebody said, oh, do we have this statistic or this information to help us make a decision? And you're like, oh God, we don't have that at all.
We always certainly do. It's just a case of like creating a ticket and someone running a SQL query.
Right. Okay. So all the data you need is always somewhere in the database.
If it's about the product itself, yes. I would say more or less. Yeah.
I've definitely had times when people have asked us a question and we're like, I don't have that data, so it's a bit awkward. That's probably just me, but
no, not at all. I think that if you're also like working with third-party tools, so for example, we've created integrations with Zapier and Make.com, and they are notoriously good at giving you some usage information, but then also you'll be limited to understand which customers are actually using it, because obviously GDPR means you have to anonymize some of that. But in those situations where someone says, why, where's the data for XYZ, maybe you can flip the question and say, actually, what's the problem we're trying to find out? Because if we don't have that piece of information, we'll have something similar, which will at least give us an idea.
I wish I'd known that. That could have got me out of a lot of trouble. Has anyone got any? Yes. Okay.
What's your view on roadmaps?
Ooh, my personal view. Where possible, try not to use them as a sales tool. Yeah, that's what I'd say. Yes.
So you don't show them to customers then, if you don't want to use it as a sales tool, or is it just internal?
I can't, obviously not speaking for Signable at all, but I think there's a lot of value in having a roadmap. But if you're a truly agile company, that roadmap can change. And if you are allowing your sales team to use it to present to customers and win business based on something that could change, obviously that's could be a very, very difficult spot to be in if you're like, oh, well, we've promised to build this feature to win X amount of revenue. And some companies are in that position. That's no judgment. But I think it can be a really, really sticky situation to be in, particularly if there's deadlines attached to it. But also that I also appreciate that in other industries where maybe waterfall or like regulation is a big thing, they might find it really unsettling to see a roadmap which is constantly changing or whatever. So that's all I'd say is like be really careful who you share that information with. Internally, I think it's great because it really motivates your marketing and success and customer team if they all know like, oh, XYZ is going to be shipped in X amount of time, but it might change, which is okay. But I think, yeah, that'd be my only caveat. Yeah.
And how far ahead would you look at? For
About a year.
a year?
Yeah.
Got time for maybe a couple more questions? Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned delivery and the importance of delivering and meeting expectations. Do you find that you kind of take most of that responsibility more so than the developers, and it tends to sit with you a bit more, that accountability?
Definitely. I think it's shared. Currently where I work, it's definitely shared. Yeah. Yeah. It is good. I think like I said, we are really lucky in the sense that we work quickly, work very, like, I think proactively. But I think having these like intense, like very hard and fast deadlines, I personally wouldn't want to work in that situation. So yeah, and I think it is in terms of like a kind of sustainable and also talking about like kind of well-being as well. I think every now and again to have a hard deadline is fine. Sometimes it happens when you have like compliance or like regulation changes. For example, the HMRC has just announced that from a certain, I think the following tax year, there's going to be a new regulation in place which will affect our tax and accountancy customers. So to an extent, there is, you know, a bit of pressure there, but it's not if you have constant deadlines. I mean, I can imagine what you'd all say. It's not great. It's not a great atmosphere to work in. So yeah.
And is there one thing that the average developer could do to make a person who's doing product easier, their life easier? Or are developers perfect? Remember your audience.
I think I don't know. I have a very collaborative hat. I really am not the sort of product person who's going to turn up. Maybe this is also wrong, but I think that doesn't help if you get a product person turning up and say my ideas are best. Just build it my way or the highway. I think that the best results you get are when you work collaboratively with engineering, with design, with product. And probably my only tip is I don't know. Maybe sit on user research calls, or at least listen to the recordings, because some of the gems that come out of them are brilliant. Yeah,
it's so interesting watching people use the software you've made, and it's like,
or they start. I don't. There's a word for it, but we've got some customers that say signables. I sent a signable, which I don't know is like just an amazing thing. They've like committed it to their vocabulary. They don't talk about the software.
Cool.
So yeah, I know.
Brilliant.
There we go.
Right. Well, we're out of time, but thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.